And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Power Hour podcast. Today, I'm so excited because I've got Stuart Baxter with me, co-founder of the Scottish User Group and senior Dynamics 365 and Power Platform Solutions Architect. I made sure before we started, Dynamics 365 and Power Platform Solutions Architect, senior. We'll be delving into his new role, getting some career advice in general, and just understanding how people can break into the Power Platform field. Stuart, I'm aware that you've done quite a bit of work in onboarding juniors in some of your previous roles, and I think people would really benefit from that as well. And then, of course, you can also find Stuart on LinkedIn and check out the Scottish User Group to find out what Stuart and co have lined up for you to learn from. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Howdan. Good to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. So I think if we start with an introduction, who is Stuart Baxter? Where did he start? And where is he today?
So, I have been in the industry for about 10 years. I celebrated my 10th year back on the 5th of January this year.
Mm-hmm.
Started off working in the end user space with British Gas through their Dyno Plumbing and Drains brand, who look after, as the name suggests, plumbing and drains on behalf of British Gas. At the time, they were running a CRM4 system, which was massively out of date and really needed an overhaul. We engaged with a partner at that point and started looking at Dynamics 365 Field Service, and at that point I fell in love with the product.
Mm-hmm.
Now at that point, Power Platform was in its infancy, Canvas apps were a thing, Power Automate was brand spanking new, no one knew what it was. And it was a little bit later on in my career that I became focused more on the Power Platform side of things, having gone through a few small consultancy jobs before landing at Curve Digital. And at Curve Digital, I worked on my first large-scale Power Platform project, where we worked with the largest online testing platform in the world, servicing about 3 million customers a year and about 2,500 contact center users. And that was when I realized that actually Power Platform is more than just Dynamics, just Canvas apps, just automation. And bringing everything together, pardon the pun, it can be a really, really powerful suite of products. More recently, back in 2023, I was awarded Microsoft MVP in the Biz Apps category. And as you touched on earlier on, I am co-founder of Scottish Power Platform User Group alongside Charlie Phipps, who was our founder, and I work alongside Josh Gillis and Rani Colhoun as well. Very, very recently, we also welcomed Will Rowe into the fold. Will from MS Talent, people will know him from community activities. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, amazing. Stuart, I mean, the Power Platform is so broad, and I struggle with this myself, but you can get quite imposter syndrome-y, I think, especially in a technology role, thinking you know less than you do or getting anxious because you don't know about everything. What's your kind of philosophy in managing that and kind of, trying to fight that imposter syndrome and trying to say to yourself that, you know what, I know enough, and how much can you actually know within the Power Platform?
So I'm going to go back to a really early piece of advice I got in the consultancy world.
Mm-hmm.
The two most important phrases in a consultant's vocabulary is I don't know and I will find out. Quite a lot of people do experience the imposter syndrome side of things and worrying that they don't know what Keith Atherton knows, or they don't know what Franco Musso knows about Power Pages, for example. And I suffered a little bit in the early days as well, and still do to an extent. But the best piece of advice I can give is it's okay that you don't know, as long as you know where to find it. And being in the really great community space that we are, there's lots of people out there who are happy to help. Power Pages, for example, is not a strong point of mine whatsoever. But there's great people like Franco out there who you can reach out to and say, look, what do I do here? And they'll give you the answer. So it's basically just becoming comfortable in the fact that you don't know everything. You don't have to know everything. being really good in one area is enough to do really, really well in this industry, and having a good network of people who are good in other areas is enough to keep achieving and keep learning and keep growing as a consultant.
Yeah. Where should people be focusing on? Like you've been working with the product since I think you said dynamic. No, before it was Dynamic CRM4. I think you said. So I guess with your experience, where do you see this going? If you had to pick a few platforms, or even if you had to give the advice of do what you love, where would you say people should see themselves?
It really depends, if I'm honest with you.
Mm.
A lot of the industry trends that I'm seeing at the moment, previously when Dynamics was first a thing, everyone wanted Dynamics.
Yeah.
Then it got to a point where everyone who wanted Dynamics had Dynamics. Then everyone wanted to customize Dynamics.
Mm.
And then everyone had customized Dynamics as far as they could take it, and they were starting to look at what else we can do with the platform. Can we automate this process? Can we build an app for that process? And my current focus at the moment is streamlining complex journeys and making it seem easy.
Mm.
Now that seems like quite a difficult ask, but it is actually generally quite simple. So by understanding what the customer needs rather than what they want, we can suggest solutions that really streamline things. So for example, we had a customer I'm working with at the moment who didn't realize that tasks were a thing. So activity tables that we know and love in Dataverse, they didn't know they were a thing. And what they came forward with was a proposal for a really blown out, over the top solution that was reinventing activities. And being able to take a step back and say, well, there's a thing for that already. Let's not spend all your time doing that, and let's take a step back, forget about money, forget about time, forget about budget, forget about capability, forget if it exists or not, and let's go blue sky thinking. What can we achieve that would make you really, really happy? And as a consultant, finding customers who get into that mindset allows you to do some really, really interesting and really rewarding things. And I guess my area of focus at the moment is creating great experiences for customers rather than specifying whether it's a Canvas app or a model-driven app or a Power Pages or a Copilot. Completely taking the technology out of it and just focusing on what can I do to make you happy. And being surrounded by people who are happy makes you happy. And being happy makes you more keen to learn more and do more and grow as a consultant, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And from a practicality standpoint, Stuart, it seems like what you're saying, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but it's not about the technology, it's about what the customer wants, and every great consultant can find that out, regardless of what the technology is. So technically, practically, is what you're saying not to focus specifically on one thing, or is it to... I guess that's my question. Is it to not focus specifically on one thing?
So there's arguments for two sides of things. There are some consultants that say niche down and get really, 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 really good at one particular thing, whether it's Power Pages, model-driven apps, Canvas apps, whatever it may be. I agree with that to an extent, because at the end of the day, you've got to deliver stuff. But I don't think that's the be-all and end-all. Like putting yourself in a box and saying I'm a Canvas apps guy or I'm a model-driven apps guy restricts your ability to deliver what the customer needs. I think being relatively good at most things will allow you to achieve some really great things for your customers. So there are people out there who can build some amazingly over-the-top Canvas apps that will really blow your socks off when you see them. But is that what the customer needs? In a lot of cases, what they need is a relatively simple, clean mobile application that means someone out in the field can do something quicker. Great user experience, accessible, clear error handling, all that good sort of stuff. But that doesn't necessarily need 10 years of experience in building Canvas apps to achieve.
What does that experience give you, if not kind of that practicality of doing things? With your experience, Stuart, what would you say separates someone who's just breaking into a field, maybe you're in a junior role, and someone who's a solutions architect? And what would you say they'd have to do in the middle to get there?
A large part of it comes with experience. Little example, customer I was working with earlier on, we're working on a planning solution. The planning solution has 4 phases. It largely aligns to a standard framework that's used by a lot of organisations. Earlier on today we had a conversation, there were some challenges came up that they were concerned about, was it achievable? Because I've got the experience of delivering similar solutions for similar customers, I was able to confidently sit back, let them finish voicing their concerns, and then say, actually, it's okay. We've delivered this before, we've successfully achieved very similar things for a very similar customer, so it's okay. And them knowing that comes from experience rather than, I think that's achievable, I think that's okay, I think that's possible. It gives me the confidence to be able to immediately answer, yep, that's totally fine, we can definitely do that. And it gives them the confidence that actually we're in safe hands here. It's not to say there aren't lots of very, very talented juniors out there, but I think the thing that sets juniors and really experienced people apart is that level of experience and that confidence. In terms of how you get there, I think it is just continue doing what you do very, very well. There are some people who, for example, are really good at building highly accessible applications. Keep building highly accessible applications, keep getting experienced in that area, and when you get questions about, is this accessible, can we make this accessible, you can very confidently and very quickly answer and say, yep, it's achievable and it's fine. And I think the other thing that sets people apart in terms of juniors and seniors as well is the confidence to be entirely honest. I've worked with a few juniors in the past who were very, very early on in their career who, it's not to say they were deliberately dishonest, but they maybe underestimated how long something was going to take or how complicated something was, and panicked and ended up working late into the evening or burning themselves out and so on. And I think with experience you realise that actually if you go forward to a product owner and say, look, something has gone wrong here, this is going to take longer or it's going to cost more money or be slightly more complicated, 99 times out of 100 they'll take a step back and say, well, these things happen. Provided you're not costing them £1 million in one user story, it's not the end of the world, and it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
And on that, so I feel like that answers the question in how to get from like a junior to a senior position. Now, I feel like a lot of people that follow my content and perhaps follow your content as well are looking to break into the Power Platform in general. So I understand you started quite early on, but for the people who are trying to get there now, for example, there's been a lot of accountants that have reached out to me and they want that transition. What are the steps to make that transition, for example, from their day job into a junior role?
So I'm actually going through that process with a guy who I'm doing a bit of mentoring with at the moment. At the moment he works for a charity. He's dipped his toe in the Power Platform world, having found some tutorials online from the fantastic Damien, who we all know and love. And he's basically looking for, what do I do next? With Power Platform becoming such a popular space, people do often find themselves in that chicken and egg scenario, where they apply for a junior role, and the junior role, they're looking for a little bit of experience, but they don't have a little bit of experience. How do they get that without being in that role? And the advice I've given the gentleman I'm working with at the moment is this is advice that's completely borrowed from Franco Musso, so I am going to shout out to him on this one. Do what we call build in public. So build in public is basically the concept of find a project that's able to demonstrate your capabilities, but is centered around something that you know and love. So you're not necessarily thinking about a complex business process. The example we're working on at the moment is the gentleman goes to park runs every Saturday. For anyone who doesn't know, these are 5-kilometre runs. There's hundreds and hundreds of venues across the UK. You show up at 10 o'clock, you run 5k, it tracks your time. And it's a really big kind of community thing. The business process is not that complicated. I've just explained it in a sentence there. And what he's effectively done, because he knows that world really well, is say, okay, how could I build a data structure to support this? And he's gone ahead and he's built his data structure in Dataverse with his various different tables and relationships and so on. His next step is he's going to be building a model-driven app. So how do we best support the people who run parkrun? We could build them a model-driven app. We could set some really nice forms, views, all the kind of standard stuff there that demonstrates that you know what a model-driven app is. And we're going to go through a journey of building a Canvas app, building some custom pages, basically touching on each of the elements. It's not going to be massive groundbreaking stuff that's going to change the world for anyone. But what it is going to do is demonstrate that he's capable of the basics. There will be some gaps we'll find as we go along, and that's perfectly okay. The purpose of building this is to find those gaps and find the areas that he needs to improve on. As opposed to focusing on getting better at everything, we're focusing down and saying, actually, your model-driven app's fantastic, but maybe your Canvas app, we need to work on the user experience, or we need to work on error handling, or whatever that may be. And what we're going to end up with at the end of it is a fully fledged working application or suite of applications that he can use in the tell me about a time when you have done X, Y, etc. that comes up in these competency-based interviews.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I would attain to that 100%. I think the first piece of advice I'd give anyone is to build something. The second piece is to do it in public. And I feel like people do struggle with the second piece a little bit more than the first. So Stuart, what would you say to those people who maybe feel in their hearts that they should put themselves out there, but haven't yet made that jump?
Put yourself out there in a safe space. There's a lot of really, really great people in the Power Platform industry who are more than happy to have a 10-minute call, a 15-minute call, a half an hour call once a week, once a month, and give you a bit of feedback on what you're doing. I find often the people who have reservations about putting themselves out there, it's through an element of fear. Is what I'm doing good enough? Is what I'm doing impressive? Is it interesting? And the answer to all of those questions is yes, but sometimes people just need someone to say yes. I'm going to reflect back on my very first in-person speaking session at Scottish Power Platform User Group almost 2 years ago now, and I'll be honest, I was massively nervous, really, really uncomfortable about the idea of speaking in public, and Charlie Phipps gave me a really great piece of advice, which was, the reason people are here is they are interested in what you have to say. No one's going to go out of their way to read your content on LinkedIn or come to a session you're presenting if they don't have an interest in what you're saying. And that really resonated with me, and it's a piece of advice I've given a lot of people over the years as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. And something I always attain to is no one actually cares. Like, someone either finds your stuff valuable, they like it, they leave a comment, and they'll scroll on to the next thing. And if they don't like it, then they'll scroll on to the next thing and, find something they like. So I think for a long time when I was making posts, people weren't reading them. And I was getting a little bit disheartened because my goal was to help people, but I wasn't getting that reach that I wanted. So what would you say to the people who are making content, but they're not being seen in the way that they want to be?
It's a really difficult one because there's a lot of different factors at play in terms of what makes your content visible to a lot of people on LinkedIn, for example.
Mm.
There's a whole load of theories around you should post 5 times a week, you should post 3 times a week, you should post at 11 o'clock, you should post at 10:30 exactly. My advice would be to take a step back and put the content out because you love what you're doing.
Mm.
And using the old cliche phrase, if you build it, they will come. I remember my very first LinkedIn blog that went out, I had 7 views, and 3 of them were me. By the 8th, 9th or 10th one, they were up at kind of 200, 300, 400, not groundbreaking viral numbers, but they were starting to get reach. And I'm now very lucky to be in a position where people recognise me, given the fact I don't do as much anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's a time game. Your very first blog post will probably be relatively low reach. Really interestingly though, I've seen something going around LinkedIn over the last kind of few months that it kind of gave me a bit of a smile. You might have seen Paul Morana has got an approach for hosting a single page website through Power Automate.
Yeah, I've seen that.
His blog post was written about 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I've seen more outreach on it in the last kind of 3 or 4 months than when he wrote it 2 or 3 years ago.
Interesting.
And people are still seeing it and finding it relevant and interesting and exciting. And as I say, he's probably got more views on that blog post in the last 2 weeks than he did the 2 years before that. And that's perfectly fine. People are interested and they've found it, maybe not straight away, but they've found it and it is something that people are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of value in long form blog posts. Like I started off just making long form blog posts and they were taking me a long time. Like each one was taking me 3 hours, 4 hours a day, like trying to put these, they were called Solution Sundays together. And the truth is nowadays my content doesn't take me so much time. It still takes me quite a bit. But the reach is higher, but that content doesn't live on. My blogs would live on. It's kind of got that difference in longevity, and I definitely say don't be disheartened from making blog posts because, like you said, I think the reason for Paul's blog posts kind of blowing up, and I could be wrong on this, but this is just me guessing, is because I saw Matthew Devani, I think that's how you say his surname, kind of build some public outreach around that. I think he made a kind of a short form picture post, and he may have given Paul some props on that. That wouldn't have surprised me. But I think genuinely blog posts do live on. So super interesting. I mean, Stuart, I'm curious to get a bit personal here and to ask why you don't do so much anymore, as you've said.
So when I first became an MVP, I felt the need to try and do a bit of everything. So I was on speaking sessions every single month. I was running the user group. I was putting blog posts out. I was putting 5 posts out on LinkedIn a week. More recently, my focus has been on growing the user group whilst doing a bit less speaking, but a bit more prepared. So, for example, I've got a session coming up called GDS the Musical. It's taken a fair bit of time and effort to kind of pull that together, but I'm more confident that it's going to be a really memorable session that I can do in kind of 2 or 3 places. And I'm more confident that it's going to stick in people's mind because, well, there's references to the Spice Girls in it. How could you possibly forget that? When have you ever seen Power Platform, Government Design Service and Spice Girls mentioned in the same paragraph? It's just not a thing. So that's helped me a fair bit in terms of kind of taking that step back and saying, right, how do we do something really memorable that's going to get a lot of value for a lot of people? Doesn't necessarily need to be thousands of people, even if it's tens of people. having that impact and spreading the information that I want to spread. With the user group as well, it's important to me to kind of bring on that next generation of community people as well.
Mm-hmm.
Scotland is comparatively quite a small place. Like, there's Edinburgh, there's Glasgow, there's Aberdeen. No one lives in Aberdeen apart from Damien Bird, that's miles away. Generally speaking, it's quite a small pool as well. But if you compare us to the north of England, for example, being able to travel from Newcastle to Manchester, Liverpool, etc. It's an hour on the train. You can go and you can do lots of events and things and lots of user groups. In Scotland, it's kind of 2-3 hours to get to Newcastle, and that's the closest major city to us.
Yeah.
And I wanted to build a platform in Scotland where people could have a space to either come along and speak with us for the first time before going on to being all over the country and all over the world, or being safe in that actually they've just got a safe space they can meet kind of once a month with like-minded people and learn some new things. And I feel like it's more rewarding for me doing that than it is writing a blog post every week and 5 short-form LinkedIn posts, for example.
Yeah. And you mentioned something there which kind of stuck with me, because I've got my first kind of presentation in 2 days in Bristol. So I'm curious what makes a presentation, a demo, memorable, and what makes it something that doesn't stick into people's minds so much.
So for me, some of the most memorable sessions I've been to have had a very niche theme to them.
Mm.
So a couple of examples, I saw a session from Rory Neary last year at our first birthday party with the user group, where he sang. Haven't seen many sessions that involve someone singing.
Yeah, me either.
I took a fair bit of value out of that session, but the thing that sticks in my mind is, how often do you see people sing? It's not to say you have to sing at your sessions, but it's something a bit different.
Yeah.
Saw a really great session from Laura Walker at the last user group meeting, where she demonstrated some little known features in model-driven apps, using a model-driven app themed around murder mystery TV shows. And it was interesting when the next day I couldn't remember what one of the features was called, but I could remember that when she spoke about it, it was Murder, She Wrote episode 7 she was looking for.
Right.
And just kind of visualised that in my head, model-driven app in front of me, Murder, She Wrote, right, that was there. Where was the button in relation to the words Murder, She Wrote? That's there. Without having that thing to refer back to, being perfectly honest, in 3-4 months' time, I probably would have forgotten that feature existed at all.
Mm.
I think it's doing something different and doing something a little bit fun. If you read back on any of my really early blog posts and things, they're very formal and there's no humour in them, there's no kind of secret sauce in there that makes it different from every other blog post about that subject.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what makes certain individuals stand out really well.
Yeah, I agree. And something I'm always encouraging people and attaining for people to do is to get their stories out there and get their personality showing. Because the truth is, if you just put out the same AI generated fluff that the next person is, there's not much differentiating you from that. But if you're putting personal experiences, you're relating them back to a technology, you've got something that's going to stay in people's minds. I think it's so important. In terms of public speaking, I mean, you know, I'm super nervous. Like, I don't know how this is going to go. And just based off this conversation, I have a very generic model-driven app that I'm doing my demonstration on. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's probably too late to change anything on that. But I guess, how do you calm those nerves before you kind of get on the stage? Like, is there anything you can do beforehand? Is there any preparation you can do?
Controversial answer on this one. You can't and you shouldn't.
All right. Okay.
I think it's perfectly okay to be nervous. It's perfectly okay to be worried that you're not going to do the best possible job that you know you can. It's a point of pride for you doing the best you possibly can. Little known fact though, most people won't care if it's not your absolute best. They might not see your absolute best. When you take a step back and you're kicking yourself and you go, I wish this bit was better, I wish that bit was better, there's a room with 25, 30, 40 people in it who were actually going, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's fine to be nervous and it's fine not to be perfect. I feel like perfect in general in our industry is something everyone is striving for and no one can achieve.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, the two bits of advice I would give is remember that people are interested in what you've got to say, and remember it is okay to be nervous.
Yeah. No, I love that. Stuart, like I said before we had this call, like I'm a huge fan of yours because even before I came into this space, the community space, you were around, and no, it's absolutely my pleasure. I mean, you've done so much work to kind of get to where you are. I suppose my question is, from a community perspective, are there any tough lessons that you've learned? Like, for example, one of mine is LinkedIn consumption. Like, I used to have the phone app. I check it when I wake up, I check it during the day, I check it in the afternoon, and like it was really harming my productivity, it was harming the stuff I do. Like it's a really weird thing, but I'll check LinkedIn, I'll get down, and then I wouldn't want to go to a gym or something like that, you know? So I deleted the app, I took consumption out of it, I put it at the end of the day, and that really helped me kind of manage that community engagement and kind of get to people when I can. What are some tough lessons you've learned from that?
So before we go into lessons, I want to give you a really great piece of advice I got from Will Dorrington. This was about 15 minutes after I got my MVP award. I'd given him a call. Will was my boss at the time, and we'd had a few chats in the run-up during the nomination process, and we'd done the whole congratulations, really pleased for you, all that kind of conversation. And he said, before I let you go, remember, when it stops being fun, stop doing it.
Yeah.
And that's something that's resonated with me and something I've taken through the kind of the community engagement stuff over the last few years. I was finding at one point I tried to put out a blog every single week and 3 LinkedIn posts and was very methodical about what I was doing. And it became like work.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fun anymore. And there was times I'd be sitting on a Saturday afternoon thinking I need to write a blog for Monday. When actually I should have been sitting relaxing or doing something nice and kind of not allowing the fear of not doing that thing that I've committed to myself I'm going to do by Monday. And taking those deadlines out of it and things as well really helped me. Been able to take a step back and say, actually, I'm going to do this because I want to do this, not because I feel like I have to do it because it's Monday, for example.
Yeah.
There are obviously some things that do have deadlines, like, for example, making sure we've got speakers for a user group and paying the venue and things like that. They're not quite so fun, but keeping it fun and focusing on why you got into this in the first place. We do have a really, really strong community of fantastic people who are willing to go out of their way to help each other. And most of the ones I've experienced genuinely love doing that. Like what they get out of giving their time to other people is the satisfaction that they've helped someone. And I think focusing on that rather than, like you say, checking LinkedIn 15 times a day and worrying on a Saturday afternoon about a blog post that you haven't written for Monday, it's just not fun. So just taking that step back and keeping it fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of kind of community engagement and criticism, is that something that you've had? Is that something that you've gone to manage? Or has it all been relatively positive on your end?
It's generally been relatively positive. I think there's maybe once or twice that a piece of content I've put out's had a bit of a snarky comment from someone on it, or a bit of a, that's not right, this is right instead kind of thing. Generally speaking, we don't tend to see a lot of that. Um, I won't name any names, but there was a really quite negative comment on a post from Sean Astrakhan, kind of 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it was interesting because the person's criticism was basically diminishing what Sean was trying to do with Architects Accelerator, for example.
Mm.
And it was very interesting to see one negative comment surrounded by about 500 really positive comments.
Yeah.
And it did make me think at the time as well, like there will always be that one person who's not happy with what you're doing, but take a step back, forget about them, and look around.
Yeah.
And on that one post, there was, as I say, like hundreds, if not more, people saying how great it was and how happy they were and how much value they'd got from that particular thing, and focusing on that rather than one person who's a bit upset about something else that day and decided to vent on LinkedIn at someone.
And I think it's also important to say that that person will always be the loudest. So try and tune that noise out.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, Stuart. Um, I'm curious in terms of career growth. So you've had a few roles over the last few years. I suppose my question is kind of around when do you feel it in your heart, in your gut, when it's the right time to leave? Are there certain signs? Is it just a gut feeling? Like, what are some of the things that drive you to that decision?
So, as we all know, there's a lot of partners out there that have a lot of different areas of focus.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, Digpacks, who I worked with very recently, they were solely focused on healthcare. And they did healthcare really, really well, and that was the direction of travel for them as a business, and it was what they were known for. And that had its benefits in that you got to work with healthcare customers and genuinely change people's lives. But being in a niche of that type, for me personally, was challenging. There are certain limitations that come with the healthcare industry that you might not face in, say, the defence industry or the agriculture industry or the contact centre industry, for example. And although I took a lot of really positive stuff away from my time in that role, the position I've came into has a wide variety of projects for a wide variety of industries. And I think it's important to consider probation periods as a two-way street as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you join a company, more often than not, you have a kind of 3 to 6 months probation period to demonstrate that you are right for that business. I think it's important during that as well to take a step back for yourself and think, is this business right for me?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily negatives that they are doing or positives they are doing, it's more, is this business suited to where I want to grow as a consultant, for example? And some of the roles I've been in more recently, as I say, have taken a whole load of really positive things away and taken a step into kind of leadership roles. Having taken that period of reflection late last year, I'll be honest, leadership is not for me.
Yeah.
I quite like that sense of satisfaction you get during a sprint demo where you pull out something really impressive that a customer didn't expect or you exceed their expectations, and that little smile. Quite often they'll then follow that up with a really nice comment about how impressed they are or whatever, but that little smile, when you see that smile, that changes the dynamic of a whole week. And you see those little smiles over and over again when you're out delivering things. Whereas in the leadership roles, there's not quite so much of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest as well, keeping this really simple, I've missed working with dynamics. A lot of partners are going more towards the Power Platform side of things, and that's perfectly okay for a lot of people, but Dynamics is quite honestly my first love when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
So it's
And
been great getting
Stu-
back into that space.
Yeah, and I love that. And sorry to interrupt you, but in terms of that line between and this is coming from someone who hasn't been with the CRM for so long. Um, that line between dynamics and model-driven apps, where does it blur? Like, where does that come together?
It's a really tricky question to ask, actually. So, my own definition is if Microsoft built it and you're extending it, that's dynamics. If you built it from scratch, that's a model-driven app. Similarly, though, Dynamics is a series of model-driven apps, custom pages, canvas apps, flows, etc. So if you look at field service, for example, the field service settings area is the world's first custom page. A lot of the things that run field service behind the hood are flows. The original field service mobile was a canvas app for a very, very short time before becoming a mobile model-driven app. I guess the way I like to think of it is around building a house or buying a house. You can go out to any builder's merchant in the country and you can buy a load of bricks. Build your own house exactly how you want it to your specification. You want a large bathroom and a small kitchen, you can do that. Or you could go out to someone who's already built a house and say, I would like that one. And then you can paint it, you can change the kitchen, you can change the bathroom, but it's still their house.
Yeah.
Underneath the hood, it's still what it was originally built to do. And I think that's kind of similar to Dynamics and Power Platform. Power Platform, you're buying bricks. Dynamics, you're buying a house.
Interesting. And when do you see yourself using Dynamics, and what kind of situations do you see yourself using model-driven apps? So what are kind of the key takeaways? Oh, sorry, the key points that drive that decision.
So for me, when considering what the right solution is, it's around gap analysis. So, little example, a few years back, I worked with a customer during COVID who was an accountancy firm. And their need was to be able to service their customers and offer them from a range of products that may or may not be covered by an agreement that's in place. And the initial proposal was Dynamics 365 Sales, because they were selling a thing. They'd been referred to us by Microsoft at the time when they'd heard selling went sales. We explored what they actually needed, and it turned out that sales wasn't fit for purpose at all for them, but field service was. And it's an interesting situation. So completely forgetting the product name and what it's intended for, looking at what the customer needs and then saying, actually, does an off-the-shelf product that already exists tick a lot of these boxes? If it does, then considering, is it going to be 3 months to build a version of this in Power Apps, or is it 2 years to rebuild half the functionality of field service? If it's the latter, just give them field service. You can still extend, you can still customize and things, but it's really around thinking how close is the products that exist to what the customer needs.
Seems like a good point to kind of go off, I think. Okay, awesome. I was always curious about that, and I never knew what kind of blurred that line. But super interesting. Stuart, I always like to ask this question towards the end of the episode. It's kind of a new segment I'm doing, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But what does happiness mean to you?
It's a really, really difficult question, actually. I suppose for me, happiness means being able to go to bed on a Sunday night without worrying about Monday. And that's in a lot of ways. It could be, like you say, the imposter syndrome creeping in and worrying, oh, I'm about to start a new project. Am I going to be able to deliver? It could just be having enough of a work-life balance that Sunday is just relaxing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the North Star for being happy for me, being able to relax on a Sunday and not be worried about waking up on Monday morning.
I love that. And could you believe that you're not the first person to give that answer? Like that, I've heard that a few times, and not to take anything away from your philosophy, but I think it means a lot to people to be able to go to bed without stressing about the day after. So I know it's a big point for me. You guys listening may have already heard this, but I suffered a lot with lack of sleep because I thought it was stomach problems, and I had exam after exam after exam. I went to so many hospitals. I was even looking at private healthcare towards the end. This went on for years, and it turned out in the end it was just stress. So, I think it's so important to keep that mind clear, turn off all of your kind of Teams access, anything that could give you anxiety. I'd even recommend social media towards bedtime. But yeah, just I think going to sleep with a content mind, I think is good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Amazing. Stuart, thank you so much for your time. At the end of the episode, I always like to roll out the red carpet, kind of let the people know what you're up to, where they can find you. The floor is yours.
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not as active as I used to be on there, but I do post a fair bit. You can also join us at Scottish Power Platform User Group in Glasgow. We have events once a month. And if you happen to be in Glasgow, you'll find me at Capgemini on West Regent Street.
Love it. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Stuart. And thank you for everyone tuning in at home, on your way to work, in the gym, cooking your breakfast. I don't care. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for your time, Stuart. Take it easy.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.